What's up, guys? So today I'm going to be doing a care guide on leopard geckos. They're pretty amazing creatures. I've got one right here. His name is Karn, and let's just get into it and talk about what you gotta do to care for these amazing creatures. So leopard geckos are from places like Iran, Pakistan, some parts of India, and just in the Middle East area of Europe. And they're quite common. They're like, you can see them probably if you go out into not like desert, because they don't live in deserts, but in their native area, you'll probably see one or two. They're not like super rare. So most people used to think that leopard geckos were like, I can't remember, it wasn't nocturnal and it wasn't diurnal. Crepuscular. That's what people thought they were, but recent studies have discovered they're more like cathemeral. I wrote that down so I could remember, but it's like they're up infrequently, so like not at a set schedule. Kind of like, I guess, someone who's self-employed, they just get up when they're ready to and go to sleep when they're ready to. I guess if they're not a very good employer to themselves, but that doesn't matter. That's just an example. So they're up when they feel like it, basically, because they don't have a job and they don't really care when they get up. So sometimes I'll see him up at like midnight, and sometimes he'll be up at like 3 in the afternoon. Like, you never know with these things, because I guess that's just how they are in their natural habitat. So leopard geckos get to be about 6 to 10 inches. My guess for Karn is he's probably like around 7, 8, but probably closer to 7 inches. They don't get huge like some lizards, like bearded dragons. I mean, they don't get huge, but they get bigger. You can get like giants, I think. They can sometimes get bigger, but they're more expensive, and I don't know why you'd want to have one crazy bigger. I don't really know what's the point of that, but I don't know. They're not like huge, but they're also not like the tiniest pet you would ever get. Like, I have some Mediterranean house geckos. I'll put it up on the screen so you can see what they look like. But they're about like a medium to the smaller end of the scale of like reptile sizes. So speaking of sizes, enclosure size is kind of a debated topic. I think basically anybody will tell you 10-gallon, that's too small for an adult. 10-gallon is fine for when it's a baby, but basically once it's like at least, you better have it out by 6 months. 6 months is probably a good time for having it in like a smaller like tub or like 10-gallon tank. When they're adult, the absolute minimum tank size would be 20-gallon. I would highly recommend getting something bigger than a 20-gallon, because it's not a whole lot bigger than a 10-gallon, even though it sounds twice as big. It is technically twice as big, but it's a lot taller. So maybe a 20-gallon long if you must go with 20-gallon, but probably 40-gallon. 40 gallons definitely good. Bigger, is always better. You don't want like one the size of your bedroom, because it might be kind of hard to find them. I guess if you want to, that's fine. It definitely wouldn't be a problem as long as you have the right humidity and heating, but I feel like that would be a little over the top for a leopard gecko. Okay, so hides. You want to have 3 hides. You want to have a hot hide, a cold hide, and a humid hide. The humid hide can also be your hot hide if you're good enough to tell when it's about to shed, because the humid hide is generally where it goes when it wants to shed. So I actually only have 2 hides in my tank, because I have a lot of plants, and he likes to hide around the plants. So I have I guess if you count plants, I have probably 7 hides. But it's different when you have plants. But in the beginning, I would suggest for your hot hide to be its own thing and then have a humid hide, because in the beginning when you're having a baby leopard gecko, they will be shedding like so fast. I mean, you're not going to be shedding like once a week, but they're going to be shedding a lot more than, say, like a matured leopard gecko like mine. And I can tell when he's about to shed because I basically hold him every day, and I can tell he's about to shed, so make sure to keep his hot hide nice and moist to help him release that shed. So make sure you have a cold hide, a hot hide / humid hide, or when it's a baby, have a hot hide and a separate humid hide. And you can also, even when it's adult, have a separate humid hide, but just for my leopard gecko, I only have 2. So for the general heat of a leopard gecko's tank, the cold side of the tank, which for me is this side, it should generally be around like 75 to 80 degrees. And then the hot hide should, like the hot side, should be like 80, 90, somewhere in there. And then obviously the basking spot should be hotter, so like 90, 95, a little above, a little below of any of those amounts is not gonna hurt him. Like, there's obviously not a always specific setting of the sun, like say in Iran, like I was talking about earlier, because in the natural habitat it's gonna range. They go to where they feel comfortable. So like if maybe they're getting a little hot, they'll go to the cool side. If they're getting a little cold, they'll go to the hot side. And so they'll just regulate themselves. Just make sure there's a gradient throughout the whole tank, just so they can regulate the temperature how they want to, because they are cold-blooded creatures, not warm-blooded creatures like us humans and most mammals, because they need to be able to regulate their temperature. They can't regulate it in their body like hot-blooded, warm-blooded creatures can. For humidity, like 20 to 40% is generally a good range for humidity, which is generally the humidity in your house on a regular basis, because, I mean, unless you live in Florida or like say Houston, where it's always super humid, and maybe you would want to maybe check it more often to make sure it's not getting too humid. Like 45 is not going to kill your leopard gecko, but it's just generally better to keep it below 40 and above 20. So that's just a general rule of thumb, and if you get a little above, a little below, just like the temperatures of the tank, it's not going to kill them, but it's a good range. So for water, some people say don't have a water bowl in your enclosure. That's probably fine, but for mine, I do like to keep a water bowl because I actually see mine drink a lot. For a leopard gecko, at least. I don't see it drink every day, but sometimes I do see it drinking out of the water bowl, which I gotta admit, that's not normal. Generally, leopard geckos don't drink out of water bowl, but I keep mine in there and he utilizes it, so why not? And it's a good idea to keep it in yours, unless you're having trouble with humidity getting too high. Take the water bowl out. And make sure to spray the tank and make sure the humidity isn't getting too low, and it'll be good, because generally they drink water off like droplets, or they actually get most of their water through eating like bugs, because that's what they eat is bugs. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So they get most of their H2O from their food and droplets. So they don't technically need a water bowl, but I think it's a good idea to give them a water bowl. So for substrate, that's kind of a hot topic. It's generally getting people are understanding that loose substrate is fine. I'm sure there's definitely still people out there who think never have a loose substrate because it's going to kill your leopard gecko. It won't. I have a mixture of play sand and potting soil. I think that's the best and cheapest way to get a good natural substrate. That's basically what they have in places like Iran and India where they come from. Because it's generally a rocky, soily with mixed with sand type of area. So that's what I have in my tank. I like to keep it like their natural environment. So for substrate, just potting soil, play sand. Definitely, number one, never ever do calci sand. Calci sand is what, like PetSmart and Petco, they still recommend it, which is insane to me. Obviously, I'm getting a little annoyed at that because calci sand is deadly to leopard geckos. It has calcium in it, which they need, so they will lick the calci sand. And that's that particular type of sand that they use for calci sand. It will clump together, unlike play sand, which falls apart even when it is wet. So once it's inside their system, it will clog up in their stomach and they won't be able to get food. And they will die because of something called impaction, where they cannot get, like, their digestion doesn't flow through, and so they just can't eat and they die. So never calci sand. Always make sure, if you're putting sand in there, which I think is a good idea to put some sand, to make sure that it's play sand. Never get like construction sand because that sand is meant to pack together and that's not what you want. So play sand is good for not having impaction. So make sure it's play sand and potting soil. With the potting soil, make sure there's no like things in there to like supplement for plants, like different like plant foods. That's not good for your leopard geckos, so make sure it's just soil, no like plant foods or anything like that. So for lighting, they need light in the enclosure. They need a light cycle. So I have mine at a 12-hour cycle. It doesn't need to be exactly 12. It can be 14-10. It doesn't matter, just as long as it's not like 2 hours light and then 22 hours dark. Obviously it needs to be a general like daylight cycle, but it doesn't always need to be exactly 12-12, 10-14. It can vary. My lighting system is just automatically set to turn on every 12 hours and turn off every 12 hours, so it's just easier and I don't have to turn it on and off. And it's also helpful when you're going on trips, so you don't have to turn it on and off. Obviously you can't do that while you're on a trip. So it's just helpful to have that kind of automatic, switching it when you think it's a good time. I think it'd be cool to eventually have some sort of automatic timer that whenever the sun comes up in like where I live, it will turn on, and whenever the sun goes down where I live, it'll turn off. I haven't got one yet because they're kind of expensive. If someone's out there wanting to sponsor me and give me one of those timers, I'd be happy to take it. So just make sure you have a general lighting cycle. And it doesn't need to be perfect every single day. It doesn't need to be the exact same. It's not going to hurt it. It's obviously not the same every day in real life. So as long as it's on a general light cycle, it'll be fine. So for diet, they will eat mealworms, crickets, dubias. They'll eat other things too, like waxworms, but definitely be careful about waxworms and not give them too often because it's not exactly the healthiest. Superworms, those are also more of like a, I guess, desserty type food. You don't want to feed it them too often because it's got lots of fats in it. Unless you have like a really skinny leopard gecko, giving them waxworms is helpful to get some fat back in their tail because that's where they store their fat. So those those few things like waxworms, superworms, and silkworms. Those are good to keep on like the low end of their diet. So crickets, dubias, mealworms are good for like the majority of their diet. So that's basically it for diet. They only eat insects. They're insectivores. They can't have salads. They can't have meats. They can't have like liquid diets. Just insects because they are insectivores. And for supplements, you want to give them calcium. And depending on if you're doing D3 in your calcium will depend on if you have a UVB bulb. UVB is a specific like light that comes from the sun that they'll get in the wild. I don't have a UVB bulb because they're kind of expensive and you don't need one if you're doing D3 in your calcium. And I'm not exactly sure that it even helps for leopard geckos. There's some things people are trying to figure out if it's actually good for them. And if it does come up that it is actually good for them, I will get them a UVB bulb. And I suggest you to if that is, but even then, D3 is sufficient for a leopard gecko. If you want to get a UVB bulb, it's definitely not going to hurt them, but it is not a requirement. And also, I forgot about multivitamin. Multivitamin, make sure you're getting one for leopard geckos. So it'll make, like, this is a supplement like guide, so I'm not going to give you the specifics on supplements. If you want one of those, let me know in the comments and I can make us a complete supplement video. So make sure you get a multivitamin. And for like scheduling, I would suggest, so over the week, 2 of the days should be multivitamin and the rest should be calcium. If you have UVB, depending on what you decide for your leopard gecko, you can have 2 different calciums. You can have a D3 and a not D3 calcium. And then you can, if you have a UVB, be careful on not giving them too much D3. Maybe give them like D3 once a week, and that's probably good. But if you don't have a UVB bulb, do D3 with every calcium. Okay, also when you're feeding, when they're babies, you want to feed them every single day. When they're about 6 months old, you want to feed them like every other day. And then like when they're fully adults, like 2 to 3 times a week. I generally feed him 2 times a week, and that works very well for him. He's obviously staying at the right weight. So just make sure when it's little, every day. When it's 6 to 12, like every other day. And then when it's adult, 2 to 3 times per week. And also, if they're getting a little too fat, cut down on the food a little bit. When they're little, a good thing to do is feed them around like 8, if you're doing mealworms, like 8 mealworms a day. And then if you're doing dubias, a lot less, because dubias have a lot more nutrition in them. So it'd be like 2, 3, 4 dubias a day. So that's basically it for diet and supplements. So handling is basically what I've been doing this whole time, where he's been going across my hand, he's been on my shirt. For handling, if they're having trouble handling when they're little, just make sure you like handle them often enough where they get used to you. And if they're like so skittish that every time they get in your hand they jump away, you can start off by just putting your hand in the enclosure and leaving it there for a few minutes just so they can get used to your hand. And then once they start getting used to it, you can hold your leopard gecko like in its enclosure. And so if it hops off, and it can run to its enclosure and it won't like get on the floor and run away and you'll lose it. So, but then once it starts, it'll crawl along your hands, and you can take it out of the enclosure, like sit on a bed or a couch somewhere away from other pets like dogs and cats, so they don't frighten your gecko, is good. So just keep it low to the ground or a couch or a bed, so like if it does jump off, it won't have far to fall. And then just handle it like maybe when it's little, maybe every other day, but then once you get more, just start doing it every day, and eventually it'll just sit on you and maybe walk around you a little bit like mine does, where you basically don't even have to think about it. Like sometimes I'm just sitting on my bed and I let it sit and walk around, and I go, oh man, where'd he go? And then he's sitting on my shoulder. I'm like, oh, there he is. Okay. So just make sure when you're like just starting to like handle your gecko to be careful and cautious and be able to recognize if it's about to like run away super fast, so you can be prepared and be able to grab it or get it low to the bed slash ground slash couch. So cohabitation is something that people debate about whether you should do with leopard geckos. I don't suggest it. It's just not a good idea in my opinion, because you never know they're animals. They're basically just animals, because that's what they are, and you can't predict them like on 100% level, and especially with leopard geckos, they are known to attack each other. Definitely never ever cohabitate two males, because like next morning one of them is going to be in pieces in the tank, because they are just not going to have it. So definitely never ever two males. You can do a male and a female like if you're breeding. That's the only time you would ever do that. So only male and females if you're breeding them, and definitely learn how to breed before you start doing that, and don't just get two baby leopard geckos and stick them in a tank and hope they breed. You gotta like actually do your research on that. So the only way I've heard people actually successfully cohabiting two leopard geckos is two females. If you're like bent on
I must cohab, that's what I'm going to do.
Do your research. Like, don't just stick two females and walk away. Definitely monitor them, stick them in a tub and see how are they gonna act, and be ready to grab them away as soon as possible, because they can be violent. They don't have crazy sharp teeth, so like if you saw earlier, he did bite my finger for some reason. That's super rare. It's probably just because I'm moving my hand around a little bit more than I generally do. Like that? What is wrong, dude? I'll keep my finger like that. Is that what you want me to do? Think I'm a worm? Really thick mealworm? Crazy little dude. So like as you just saw, it doesn't hurt. Like I didn't flinch in pain, because their teeth are basically just sandpaper, and when they do bite you, they generally realize, oh, that's not food. Why would I be biting that? And so as you can see, he bit and then just let go. He's like, oh, that's not food. So they don't want to bite you, but if they mistake you for food, like today is his feeding day, so I'll be feeding him after this probably. And so he's probably getting a little hungry and thought my thumb was some food. So it doesn't hurt. The only time he ever drew blood was when I was feeding him with my fingers, and the worm like kind of went back, and it was like only his head poking out, and he grabbed like the tip of my finger right here, and it bled a little bit, but that's the only time it's ever actually hurt. And even then, it wasn't like a super bad bite. There was just like a barely broke skin, and there was a little bit of blood. So that's nothing really to worry about with leopard geckos, because like even when they do bite you, it's not gonna be that bad. Oh yeah, you were talking about cohabitation. Sorry, I got distracted. So only time ever maybe cohabbing is two females, and even then, do your research. Male and a female together for a little bit if you're breeding, but that's it. So I hope you've learned something today on how to care for leopard geckos. Make sure not just to watch this one video and do all the research and research each specific thing. Like watch a diet video, read a blog about it, watch a video on like supplements, on substrate, just to make sure you don't take one person's opinion, and because that's always a good thing to do your research when you're handling a leopard, when you're taking care of a lizard or any pet. So it's a living being and you want it to stay happy and healthy. So thank you for watching. If you want to watch a video where I rated an AI's leopard gecko care guide, I'll put it up in the corner and you can watch that. I think it was pretty funny. It was a little bit okay, but it had some definite problems, and one thing that actually could have killed your leopard gecko if you'd done it. So make sure to go watch that and like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.